Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Second and Saints. John Hendricks alongside Ross Jackson. We decided to go gray today. I guess just
Yeah, that was the uniform today.
Yeah. We understood the assignment, I guess, right? How you doing, my man?
I'm doing good, man. It's been fun. I love free agency. It's always a whole lot going on all the time, and so man, everything's been good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I feel like I just saw you yesterday. Actually, I just
Imagine
did see
that.
you on Monday, right? Like, imagine that. So, yeah, exciting times, man. It's a lot going on, with the Saints. Maybe not as much as some of these other people. Like, people are giving out a lot of cash money right now. Like,
Yeah,
it
it's been
is
interesting.
crazy how much has come together, and it's just hilarious because this legal tampering period, always put quotes behind it. It's like everything comes together so fast, and it's like, okay, the team who's going to get caught doing something wrong is only like a matter of time, probably. And it's always one of those. It's just fascinating that, all these deals just magically get done right here and there, even though
Yeah.
the teams can't talk directly to players and stuff. But,
And
it happens.
it's funny that like what's probably going to happen is that instead of a team actually getting in trouble, they're just going to change the rules. Like they're just going to be like, we might as well just open free agency 2 days early and just like let it be what it is.
Right.
Like it's only a matter of time, I feel like.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, like, you have to be cap compliant before Wednesday gets here, but it's like as soon as teams get cap compliant, like just pull the trigger, let it go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I get there's language in certain contracts, like Cars was third day of the new league year, all this other stuff, but it's just we know what it is. Like we're covering this for as long as we have. But for the Saints, obviously it's been kind of memorable. I guess we could kind of start from what's recent to work our way back a little bit, but obviously, as of Tuesday afternoon, about 12:30 when we're recording this, Louisiana time, because that's the right time and such. But Will Harris has become the latest person to not come back. And I guess that's not really that surprising. A 2-year deal with the Commanders for $10 million. The Saints really have got to give some attention to their secondary because it's not only him. They lost Paulson and Adebo to the Giants, which is not a surprise. That's a pretty good payday for Paulson. But those are two guys who played a lot for you. Maybe not so much Paulson, but he's played a lot over the years. But Will Harris was a guy who was a special teamer and then came into the equation, ended up winning the starting job and ended up being kind of a little bit valuable. But, unfortunate, but that's part of the business, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we don't know how much like I think keeping both of those guys would have made sense personally, like looking at the team, seeing what they need, knowing what it is that those guys do. But we don't know if they would have fit in Brandon Staley's defense either. Although Brandon Staley sounds more like it's less about fitting in his defense and more about being on the roster. And then he'll create kind of the system around that, similar to what Kellen Moore talks about over on the offensive side. But I'm not massively surprised to see them end up elsewhere, but I would have liked to have seen them re-signed in New Orleans. I think they would have been valuable to the team. But, both positions are addressable here throughout free agency. Both positions are addressable in the draft without having to go too early at either position as well. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see new faces there, especially at safety, of course, because I think safety is the bigger need now than corner even is. Because at least at corner, you've got Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry, and you can build out the rest of that room. But if you want Alontae Taylor on the inside, then you might need another corner on the outside. But in any case, like you need a future at safety and you need a present at safety. And I think that's the bigger concern between those two.
Yeah. And the thing is, in talking to Brandon Staley and obviously just kind of piecing together what we've talked with some of these coaches too is, look, we've talked about base 3-4, whether it's a base 3-3, whatever the case, they're going to run a lot of nickel. They're going to have defensive backs on the field. So right now it's Tyrann Mathieu and Jordan Howden really is kind of the two that they have. And so you definitely need more players just from on a roster basis, if you will.
Right.
But it's just one of those. I guess my question from an X's and O's, somebody who kind of putting you on the spot, but in a nickel, does that change much what you need from a safety if you do change to a 3-4 or anything like that?
I think the big thing that you're looking for is what the play style of the safeties is going to be. Less like 3-4 versus 4-3. It's more so like, are you going to run a lot of quarters? Because if you're going to run a lot of quarters, then you need those safeties to be able to crash down and contribute in the run game. If you're going to run a lot of cover 3, then you need, a guy that might be able to hook under in the middle and another guy to be able to play over the top, but then you need your corners to be deep corners and stuff like that. So it kind of comes down more to what it is that you're doing on a play call by play call basis, more so than an overall scheme basis. But what we do know is that Brandon Staley has had success with safeties that can make some plays underneath on one side and then safeties that can play deep on the other side. And so you're having to find a way to, take away crossing routes in terms of pattern matching and cover 6, right? To where you have a deep safety that's got one half of the field, but then you've got a deep safety and a deep corner on the other half of the field. So it's cover 4 on one side and cover 2 on the other side and all these other things. Like that part is the kind of trickier part around all of it, is how do you find those guys that are going to be versatile enough to be able to come down and play a robber role versus those that are going to be able to play that deep safety versus those that are going to be able to crash down and help you out in the run game, all those other things. So really what you need is kind of the most versatile pieces possible. And I think if you take Tyron and you let him play closer to the line of scrimmage, a little bit more to his strength, and then you try to find the deep safety, that might be an easier task and a more reliable task for 2025 than the alternative or trying to move Tyron around too much and things like that. Like let him play to the greatness of his game, which is typically closer to the line of scrimmage. I mean, the guy could do anything, but typically closer to the line of scrimmage, and then go and find that like free ranging deep safety if you can find that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think there's a variety of ways they can go about it. And obviously we know it's like right now you look at it, they got to build out a 90-man roster and they don't really have what they need currently to do it. And maybe there are some surprises, like a second year Rico Payton. What does he do in the second year? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that's what definitely is going to be the answer, but I think given with what Nick Underhill at NOF reported is that the team was interested in Travarius Ward before he got picked up. And I thought that was pretty interesting that the Saints are looking for a corner. I think that's obviously something that's of note just to keep in mind here. Asante Samuel Jr. is somebody obviously I think could make a lot of sense here, right? And of course it's going to depend on financials, all this other stuff. But I do think the Saints on that side of the ball, and particularly in the secondary, they really need to get some players because now we talked about this on other episodes, past episodes. We didn't think we envisioned the life without Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo, right? And so this is kind of where they're going to be. And, of course, that's super important to figure out. Linebacker, I think there's some additions that they'll end up being made there, but really I think where from there is the trenches, right? Like you've seen the attention to the trenches just in a bit, right? Trading for Davon Godchaux, re-signing Chase Young, that's a big one, even though a lot of people don't necessarily agree. They're split. Where do you kind of sit on Chase Young coming back to New Orleans?
We'll find out. That's where I am. I think it makes sense from the financial standpoint. Like if his cap hit in 2025 is lower than $9 million and the Saints actually save money in 2025, keeping him as opposed to watching $9 million of dead cap walk out the door with him. So I think that part of it is sensible, makes perfect sense. Chase Young said that he felt that he rushed the passer the best in his career last season. He didn't have the sack production to show that, but he had the pressure production. So that's 73 total pressures, number 6 overall when it comes to next gen stats tracking. I think 66 in PFF's next gen tracking, or PFF's tracking, excuse me. And then like over 20 hits on the quarterback, all that. So like you can kind of see where the production was getting there to where he was close to being that, double digit sack guy that everybody kind of expects out of a number 2 overall selection. And so does Brandon Staley's defense help him get there, right? Does Brandon Staley's defense put him in position to be able to do what it is that he does best, better than he was last year, right? So I think that's got to be the thing. So for me, it makes sense from a financial standpoint, but the production in 2025 has got to be there. You look at, I looked at 2 other guys that received $17 million per year contracts here in the recent past. Alex Highsmith got one in 2023. No, yeah, 2023, I think. Yeah, after a 14.5 sack season in 2022. Since then, he's had 13 sacks. Bryce Huff with the Philadelphia Eagles got a $17.003 million extension in 2024 after 10 sacks in 2023, and he had 2.5 sacks last season. Those tell very different stories, right? So like that's and Bryce Huff was dealing with injury. He only appeared in 12 games last year too, but that's a part of the conversation as well. You know what I mean? And so I think that's got to be the big piece of it.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Like that's what I was trying to tell people and stuff. Is just like I get it. You're paying a pass rusher. You got to get to the quarterback, right? And the 66 pressures, that's a big deal. I definitely want to see him finish more plays. But again, you go back, how many of those pressures led to other people getting sacks, right? And even if Chase Young finished with double-digit sacks, they're still 5-12. I don't care what you say. Like they're still 5-12 from last year. You know what I mean? Like, and I get it. When it's a key moment of the game, that's where I want to see Chase Young really kind of elevated. They do have a dedicated edge coach this year and Jay Rogers, and so really excited about him. And we got to talk to him a little bit. You got to talk to him. I got to talk to him a little bit. I know his stop in the Falcons wasn't particularly that great, but before that with Brandon Staley, this guy's really fired up to be here. And I don't know, what was the sense that you got from him?
His wife's a Saints fan too. She grew up in Louisiana, so that was super cool.
Mandeville, actually.
That whole side of the family is like all Saints fans. So that was pretty dope. No, I love I think Jay Rogers is a good hire, but I also just specifically like the specificity of having an edges coach along with the defensive line coach, having an assistant DBs coach along with the cornerback coach, along with the pass game coordinator. I love that part. I think, to me, and then having a linebackers coach and an assistant, and then also having an assistant defensive line coach, like I love all of that, because the way that he explained it to me, I think I wrote down the exact phrase that he said, because I liked the phrase that he said. I'm going to my notes a lot more today. I wonder,
that's good.
I must be losing my mind.
No, you just definitely want to get it right.
He basically said that like the communication channel is more direct, right? The communication line is more direct. And I like that, because you might be a defensive line coach trying to coach your entire defensive line, and you might say something that applies and is structured more for how an interior defensive line might play it, not necessarily how the edges might play it, the edge rushers might play it. And so instead now you have this kind of overarching umbrella approach by Brandon Staley, but that it's being communicated to the edge rushers by a guy that specializes in that position, to the interior defensive line by a guy that specializes in that position, to a safety by a guy that specializes in that position, so on and so forth. That's what I really like about that hire. So we'll see how that helps a guy like Chase Young. I get that like the pressures and stuff like that are good things. I get that the edge defender, edge rusher position is more than just about sacks, but you got to get sacks. Like, I'm sorry. Sure. I know it doesn't necessarily like bring you wins and stuff like that. To your point, John, you're right about that. But I do think that like if a team is investing in that position, there is an expectation that that player is going to get to the quarterback. And so I think that's got to be kind of the overall evaluation, if you will, of that position after the fact, after the contract is done. Let's see what happens in 2025. But if he's going to be put in a good position, by Brandon Staley, and if he's going to be coached up well by Jay Rogers, I think that ends up maybe putting him in the best place to be able to generate that production, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. And look, I'm with you. Yes, you do have to have sacks. I absolutely agree with you. But the thing is, I just think about where the defensive line was with Todd Grantham, with Dennis Allen, with all this. It was just chaos, right?
Yeah.
Like it just, in talking to players and just everything else, it was chaotic. And so it's just one of those where I just feel like if you get the right coaches and they understand the assignments, all this other stuff, and you can work as one cohesive unit, right? Which I don't think that they had that. Like we saw good play from certain positions or this, and it was just inconsistent. I think that's a sign of coaching too, right? From a game plan execution, all this other stuff. And so I'm not saying Chase Young's going to have 12, 15 sacks next year. I don't think you have that. You know what I mean? If he gets to double digits, I think that's a win. But I would like to see the Saints overall finish plays more. I don't know of a team that has almost sacks as many as the Saints do over the past several years. That is just like a thing, right? And I hope the new injection of coaching talent can maximize Chase Young. I hope they can rebound with Carl Granderson, right? Like we talked about him benefiting potentially to go as one of those edge guys now in the new defensive look and such. I think that's another one. I'm not going to sit here and talk about Isaiah Foskey. That's a wait and see. Hopefully just somebody gets some develop poured into him. Guys like Christian Boyd, I think that remains to be seen. But yes, sacks matter. They do need to get after the quarterback. They do need to become a team that gets off the field on third down instead of these 12-play drives, 15-play drives. Can't get off on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, all this other stuff. That has to change. Like they cannot win games unless they fix that fundamental stuff.
Yeah, and they need to be able to generate, or they would benefit. Let me say it this way: they would benefit from being able to generate quick pressures and stuff like that. Not having to have these guys go 2nd, 3rd, 4th efforts, and having the corners have to cover 2nd and 3rd routes, or really 2nd routes and stuff like that. Like you've got to be able to generate. It's helpful to be able to generate speed, like to generate pressure with speed. And a guy like Chase Young, 6'4", 6'5", 6'5". 6'4", 6'5", 260 plus pounds. Like, yeah, he's a speed rusher. Like he's a good prototype for that, So can Brandon Staley have him produce the way that he had Leonard Floyd produce in Los Angeles with the Rams, back in 2020, for instance, as a defensive coordinator? I think that's the model that you're looking for. Maybe you don't get 10.5 sacks out of him, but that's the model in terms of how it is that he fits into that defensive scheme, I would imagine. But he does have the versatility to be able to also be that 4-3 end, because they're still going to use those 4 down line opportunities for sure.
Whispers, Leonard Floyd just became available from the 49ers, just so you know.
See, that's a big
We pushed hard for him last year. Yeah. We pushed hard for him last year. We really want to see Leonard Floyd in, but now with this scheme, I think it makes a lot more sense. And so I'm not saying they're going to get him or anything like that, but
I am going to retract my previous statement when I said that Chase Young can fit the Leonard Floyd mold. And I think really the guy that would be able to fit the Leonard Floyd mold really well could be Leonard Floyd. I know it's a stretch, but definitely a big one. I was wondering if San Francisco was going to move on to him because he was carrying a pretty big non-guaranteed cap number. And so I was curious to see if they were going to end up making that move. And so we'll see.
Yeah, boy, Ross says.
Well, yeah, boy.
All right. So talk a little bit about Chase Young. We talked about some of that. Here's where I want to go to this one, because I think this is where maybe you can help some people, right? Is the 3-4, the 3 down linemen, right? Yeah. So they trade for Davon Godchaux. They extended Nathan Shepard for a year. They restructured Colin Saunders. So for all intents and purposes, these guys are going to be who are on the line. But when you're in a 3-4, what do you need on those front 3? Because we know Godchaux is going to be that nose. Presumably, he'll be the nose. He can do a lot of different things. But what are you looking for the other 2 positions, and how does it work together?
Yeah, I think you want that big nose tackle, like you mentioned. And nose tackle, by the way, is the guy that lines up at like literally nose to nose with the center, right? 0-1 technique kind of a person lined up over the center or in the first gap in between center and guard. But outside of that, you kind of want those big bodied run stopper type ends at 3-4 defensive end. So that doesn't really impact the Saints prototype very much, right? Like a guy like Cam Jordan still fits that. A guy like Carl Granderson, if he stays at 270, 280, wherever it was that he was playing, like he fits that, right? But the next thing that you need, so that's kind of what you want in terms of like those 3 spots, because those are going to be the guys that are going to be in charge of limiting the run. Instead of just having 2 guys on the interior, you've got a full set of 3 down linemen that are dedicated to that. And then you get your pass rush from those stand-up outside linebackers that fit just kind of a different mold.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's just important to keep in mind. And look, I know this is a good question. I definitely want to get it from Jono. Thank you for tuning in. Obviously, shout out to him. You know, this definitely means more than a game. We all know that for sure. But the question about soft rebuilding or running it back belief that continues, like, I think we've kind of answered this. I know we've talked about this for months, and again, I've
He
been
doesn't mean it
saying
like
it.
that, Jono. He doesn't
Yeah,
mean
I
it like
don't necessarily mean.
that. He
Yeah,
doesn't mean it
I
like
don't
that,
know. Yeah, I mean, but it gets just the general consensus is yes, they are wanting to compete for the division. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the goal. These guys aren't coming in here and just not gonna turn in a 4-win season. Like they don't want to, right? The goal is to win your division. The moves that they say kind of is running it back with a different coaching staff, with a lot of the same guys, adding some new talent. I mean, disagree, agree. What do you make of that direction?
I think that this is a team that's focused on addition by addition as opposed to addition by replacement. And so there's two different ways to kind of rebuild what it is that you're doing. One of the ways that you do that is to replace talent with developing and still growing talent, which works sometimes. Houston, Washington, probably good examples of that. The other way, and it takes a little bit longer, is to add the young talent to your foundation so that by the time that your young talent is ready to go and ready to become the foundation, these other guys either have already or are peeling off. Detroit is probably the best example. One of the most recent best examples. And I'd put Buffalo in there too, but Buffalo had kind of done one until it didn't work anymore, and then they did the other and it worked. So they did a little bit of both. But like Detroit's probably a good example of that.
Gotcha.
And so for me, like that's the thing that I would look at for where New Orleans is that they're kind of in that space of trying to add by addition as opposed to add by a combination of addition and subtraction. That's my guess.
Yeah. And I mean, again, most of the moves somewhat suggest it. And again, the thing is, I've been saying, and look, they got under the salary cap and made space without having to touch Cam Jordan's contract, Tyron's contract, or Taysom Hill's contract. I mean, they can get more money based off of that, right? But, we were pretty much under the belief that a lot of these guys were coming back in the first place. Now, again, how it works out and what happens from here on out, like Taysom's going to depend on where he is at in his rehab, right? Like that's a big one there. Tyron, I know he wants to play. Cam, I don't think he can play at the tag that he's at, or the price tag he's at. He knows it. I think the Saints know it. They'll probably figure out a way to make that all work and such. But, again, this is kind of where you're at, is that the division is what it is, right? Like I picked Tampa last year. I know a lot of people rode on the Atlanta train, but, you are probably at the bottom, like you are, where you're at right now, where you based off of where you finished. I think Carolina is obviously on the improving scale, if you will. Tampa, I still think, is the favorite going into it. Atlanta, if they can figure things out, that's always been Atlanta's problem. If they can figure things out, but the Saints, they can compete maybe, but competing and executing are two totally different things. And again, this whole strategy about the way they operate in the salary cap, if it works, nobody cares. And if it doesn't work,
no one's talking. Yeah, no one's talking about Philadelphia. Nobody's talking about San Francisco, even though San Francisco had a terrible season last year. But they've been to Super Bowls each. Two of the last 4 seasons San Francisco has. Philly's been to Super Bowls 2 of the last 4 seasons. So like it's different, right? Like when you're winning, it's like, oh yeah, they're doing what they need to do to win. But when you're not winning and you're still committing to doing it, I understand why people feel cross about it. I just think that the goalpost needs to be consistent and stuff like that. Like I saw like one thing earlier, it's where it was like, oh, well, now they're restructuring Derek Carr and they didn't want him. And it's like, well, I mean, that's not really symptomatic of the approach in the salary cap. That's symptomatic of what you assume to be the case in terms of the relationship between the quarterback and the team. Like, who knows? You know what I mean? And so like those two things are different to me. And so I don't know. Like I kind of look at it as you can do it as long as you're winning. The issue becomes when you're not winning and you continue to do it and everything. But here's the thing. The real nuance that is, are you not winning? Are you continuing to do it? And are you worsening your future situation? And right now the Saints aren't worsening their future situation by restructuring guys that are already going to be under contract for the coming years. Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Carl Granderson, Pete Werner. Like these are guys that aren't going anywhere for a little while, at least a couple of years. and stuff. The issue becomes when you restructure somebody that might be off your roster next season. So the Colin Saunders one was an interesting one to me. I'm curious, was that a renegotiation or was that a rework or was that a restructure? But the good news with him is that even if he's not on the roster next year, it's like a $3.2 million, $3.5 million dead cap. Like, fine. You know what I mean? Like you'll that's standard. Like you can deal with that. It's when you're restructuring guys that aren't going to be on your team next year and they're costing you, $15 million because of it. That's where things get dicey.
Right. Like they're still paying Marshawn Lattimore, still paying Jameis Winston, still paying Michael Thomas. Right. Like those are dead money hits. Like that's what happens. Like they had Junior Galette's money on the books for the longest time. Right. Like because they moved on from him. So Darius Byrd was another one. Like they used to be the dead money queens, if you will, or whatever, kings, however that rolls. But, again, it's,
royalty.
Yeah, whatever. They were royalty. They were first in something, right? Like that's the way you guys you can look at it. It is interesting that you bring up Carr. I mean, obviously you talk about Kellen Moore. His comments publicly more supported of Derek Carr, right? Like saying that I took this job knowing that Carr was going to be the guy. And, it's interesting because of how it's kind of shifted, right? Like his first introductory is very non-committal. And I'll tell you this much. From the Carr side of things, that's how they viewed it, is that they didn't feel like he was wanted or anything like that. Had to work on that, and then comes out and says it, complete opposite. And then they try some different things from a contract perspective. It didn't work out. A restructure was always something that was a given that they could do without Carr's permission or anything like that. That's the route they go. But now, like you said, next year, his cap hits like $63 million. There's no way they're paying that, right? But what does that mean for somebody like Carr? Because you talk about dead money and all that stuff, but for next year, like he's the quarterback this year. And if I'm Spencer Rattler, I'm ready. I'm ready to go because just in case Derek Carr gets hurt
100%.
or when he gets hurt. But
100%.
After this year in 2026, what is that going to equivalent? What is that going to look like for him?
Post June 1. It's a post June 1 release, right? Like that's what it is. I think the cap hit is $69 million, and then I think like
too, actually, right?
Yeah. And then I think the dead cap out of that's like 59 because there's that $10 million that isn't guaranteed until the third day of the league year in 2026 or whatever. And so what you do is you got to designate him post June 1. Like if there's a separation, I assume there would be a separation. Just considering. I'm speculating, but I'm sure that this offseason wasn't as clean as anyone would have liked in terms of this conversation.
Absolutely.
And so, like my guess is that it wasn't as clean as anyone would have liked. But
it wasn't.
Rarely
I'll
is
just tell you it wasn't.
Yeah,
right. Like I'm reporting it was not.
You see me tiptoeing around it, just to be safe.
Yeah.
No, but so things were not as pretty as they would have as things would have liked at that position and stuff like that this offseason. That's fine. You can play nice, like you can figure that out, you can work all that out and everything like that. But I would assume that would mean that going into next year, unless somehow 2025 goes like incredibly well, which I'm not going to project at this time because that would be irresponsible. But if they are going to split next season, you designate them post June 1. It takes it from a $59 million dead cap hit, which we just talked about. Like you don't want to take those on for a guy that's not going to be on your roster anymore. It turns into a $19 million dead cap hit, which for quarterback contracts, remarkably low. Like you look at like, who was it? Kirk Cousins had a big one. Tom Brady had who was the guy? Oh, Russell Wilson had like an enormous one and all those other things.
And Denver managed.
Yeah, right. People were advocating for Dak Prescott to be out in Dallas, and he's got like he had like an 80+ million. It's like over $100 million now in terms of a dead cap hit if they would have done that. And so like, you can do that at that point, but you designate him post June 1. That way, instead of taking on $59 million right away, you take on 19 in 2026, and then you push 40, right? 59 minus 9. 40.
You spread it over the 2 years, right?
To 2026 or 2027, excuse me, where the salary cap will have gone up more than $40 million by that point from this point. And so your credit card balance gets higher as you're paying it off. And so that's a helpful situation.
It's going to be something when we get to, exactly. And it's going to be something when we get to $300 million salary cap. I'm just saying, could happen. very,
soon.
very quickly. And so, and again, I don't want to sit here and act like I'm defending Carr or anything like that and stuff, but I know a lot has been made about, where was he during Super Bowl week and all this other stuff. And I had put like a little thing out there months ago, or when we talked about it, that, saying that it wasn't so sure that he was doing rehab. He's been rehabbing. Like,
Oh
it
yeah.
wasn't just his hand injury. There was more to it than what was let on, that he was having to rehab and stuff. I think the biggest thing is the optics obviously just didn't look good. And, sometimes it'd be nice if you get that information up front, but that wasn't the case. And I understand, I get it. I know how fans are split on this, or they feel one way or the other, or calling for the pitchforks, but this is what the team is going to do. And whether you like it or not, and all this other stuff, that's just kind of where they're at right now. And so they've got to figure out that left guard situation. They've got to figure out a lot of other things that they're going to do, but free agency wise, but, where they go from here, they're going to have some space. They can have some more space. Where do you think they need to identify as far as targets, and not necessarily players, but positions that you'd like to see them address here, maybe versus the draft? But there are, make no mistake, positions you can do double down on for sure.
Yeah. I like this Leonard Floyd guy a lot. No, I do. I really do. I did I just quote tweeted the Schefter's report, and I was like, adds to wish list. Like I would love it.
Mm-hmm.
I think number one for me, make sure I don't make a fool out of myself. I don't believe he's signed yet. But number one for me is Mekhi Becton. I'm going after and willing to throw the bat. Like they've got like $20 million, $20-ish million, depending upon what the rework of DeMario Davis's contract was and what actually happened with Chase Young's cap hit here in 2025. But around like $20 million, $20-ish million, somewhere around there, give or take a couple million to spend. I go throw a bag at a starting left guard. Like I don't necessarily want to wait until the draft for that. I want to go and get that taken care of. And a guy like Mekhi Becton, who we just saw the Philadelphia Eagles trade Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to Houston. For an offensive lineman, which gives you a little bit of an indication that Mekhi Becton might be on the way out, right? The more than one departure over there. So we'll see.
Yep.
But Becton looked great in Kellen Moore's offense. Does he believe that he looked great in Kellen Moore's offense, or does he believe that he looked good with Jeff Stoutland's coaching at the position? That's the big question, right? But if he believes that he looked good in Kellen Moore's offense and Kellen Moore liked working with him, then that seems like a simple marriage to me. But you're going to have to be able to pay probably $10 million a year, maybe even more for him. Doesn't mean you have to fork up $10 million this year, though, right? Signing bonus, low base salary, backload the contract, so on and so forth. And so that would probably be the first position and first player that I would identify and go after. You could probably throw Dalton Reisner in there too. He's 2 years older than when we advocated for him 2 years ago, but he's still a guy that could have an impact. But I like going after a guy like Mekhi Becton and just trying to go and say, hey, here's a guy that started in a system of mine, knowing that Kellen Moore's system is different everywhere that he goes, but a system of mine. And I go out and get him. That's a guy that I would love to see them go after.
Yeah, I'm with you, because I think the biggest thing is that the Saints have done a pretty good job doing the bargain bin shopping, right? Mm-hmm. They did it last year. They said, okay, we got guys like Lucas Patrick, whatever the case, and then we can put him in left guard and all this other stuff. But the problem is when your bargain bin signing gets hurt or doesn't work out or anything like that, you don't have a backup plan, all this other stuff, and now you're having to scramble, putting players in there where, shifting, whatever the case may be. So again, I'm with you. I'd like to see them. I feel good about the rest of the offensive line, right? I think Cesar needs to play better. I think Eric obviously has got to stay available. He's still at the facility doing some work and stuff like that. I feel good about where they can go, that they need that starting left guard. They need somebody a high caliber to come in. Day one is going to be that force to work alongside Eric McCoy. I mean, look, it's just so needed in this offense. And you've got to have an offensive line. You look at the Detroit Lions, you look at even the Buccaneers, all these teams that can run the football have a good offensive line. They need that. And I just don't think you're going to get it with a rookie, a second-year player like Kyle Hergel. I no disrespect to him or Nick Saldiveri, but I just think you need to go in with a veteran off of this Kellen Moore offense and then kind of go from there. And one of the things I found out yesterday, which was really interesting, is, Brendan Nugent worked with Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier, obviously in Los Angeles. They crafted the playbook in Los Angeles. They're doing the same thing in New Orleans. So I didn't realize that Brendan Nugent was as hands-on with crafting the playbook as he is with Nussmeier and Kellen Moore. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, that was, I'll be honest, it was not the most successful run game over in Los Angeles. But you improve the talent ideally and then see what you can do here in New Orleans. But that is really fascinating. Brendan Nugent's a smart dude, and he's been around. Extremely. He's been here, and he was here in New Orleans as an assistant offensive line coach for a while, and then became the offensive line coach, got opportunities to go elsewhere, all these other things. So that is really interesting to hear. And then you add in a guy that was a difference maker for the Philadelphia Eagles in the run game coordinator, TJ. Yeah, right. And that's huge too, right? A guy that maybe can kind of be the missing piece to figuring out what the lack of success was in that run game over in Los Angeles, and then finding a way to maybe add, fine tune, shift, adjust, and be able to maybe excel with it a little bit more here in New Orleans. So yeah, that's a really interesting kind of piece, because it also goes to show you how collaborative Kellen Moore is, right? Like he always talks all about this stuff about like identifying the superpowers of the players and leaning on those superpowers and things like that. Stuff like that shows you like, oh no, here's literal applications of exactly what it is that he says that he does. He just talks about it, he bees about it, and I love
that. Yeah, he had said what he likes about the staff is about excellent teachers, excellent communicators, and again, the Saints need that, right? And he has a mix of everybody. Like, he didn't know Joel Thomas personally, really, but he knew a lot about what Joel Thomas did and all the different things, and Idaho thing, whatever the case. But like, he just knows Joel Thomas, the name, how respected he is, and what he brings to the table and such. So it's just, he has coaches that he kind of knows and doesn't know, right? Or really knows and doesn't know as well. And so I'm really excited to see how it unfolds. And of course, it's got to lead to wins. I'm not telling you they're going to go 10-7 and just change it and go gangbusters, but I think there's pieces there that will improve this team in one way or another, but it's just a matter how quickly it comes together, right? And how patient are they at going to make it come together?
And is it sustainable? It came together super quick for 2 weeks last year, right? And then all of a sudden, like, it started to fall off, and injuries, I'm sure, were a part of that in terms of exacerbating that and all that. But like, man, like, that's the other piece of it. Like, can you sustain it? And it's not easy, like, to be fair, like, it's not easy to install a new offensive system and in the same season be installing a new defensive system. And especially when you have two guys that are going to be feeling out what their systems are based on the talent that they have. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to make things a little bit different too. So I would highlight that's, just a piece of, like, you might see some growing pains, all these other things. Like, it's one of the reasons why I think, John, you and I are both like, yeah, win-loss record kind of is what it is in 2025, like, whatever. But can you establish the culture? Can you establish the systems? And can you get things rolling to where you have a foundation to build upon after that? I think is really the measure of success for this team in 2025.
And I'd rather them start slow and crappy and get better than start hot and
100%
present the full goal. Like, struggle 100%. Slow out of the gate. It's not looking good. All this other stuff. Then pick it up. That's, I think, what's been disheartening about the past couple of seasons, because they look good in 2-0, and then all of a sudden the real team shows up and all these things happen, injuries and stuff. And so hopefully, I'm excited about Ted Rath being on staff. I think he's going to be outstanding for this team. I think there's a lot of coaches that are going to make a difference here, that they got to have some of the talent to back it up. I'd love to see what they're going to do at the wide receiver position. Having Keith Williams back is a huge win, huge dub. No pun intended for Coach Dub.
No, every pun intended.
Didn't even think about that one. But again, it begs the question, like, they just brought back Dante Pettis. They have, some of the guys that are bringing back. Do they bring back a Marquez Valdez-Scantling? Do they look at a Keenan Allen? Do they look at a Mike Williams? What do they do there? Or do they look at, the draft? Is it a Teddy or a McMillan? There's a lot of good receivers in this draft. Or do they say, I want Tyler Warren at number 9? And then we'll go from there, because I think tight end's way more of a need right now than a lot of things. I think left guard's one of your top priorities, but I would say left guard or tight end is probably right there.
Yeah, I would say that, and that edge, corner, safety, like, kind of in that order. is kind of what I look at. Or maybe I would put along with offensive line, like you said, like left guard at the top. Like I don't mean to say more than left guard, those
Sure. No,
positions.
you're
Sorry.
good.
But like that's the number one. And then after that, it's kind of that like tight end, wide receiver,
Mm-hmm.
safety, or defensive back area. I think they kind of helped themselves at defensive tackle a bit, to where like I could still see them drafting a defensive tackle. I think it'd still be worth it. It's a really good class. And so it'd be worth diving in there, especially with as many picks as they're set to have. But, you know, it's not a situation where you have to like hope that a Mason Graham falls to you at 9. And if he doesn't, then all of a sudden, like you've lost your opportunity to address defensive tackle the way that you needed to. You know what I mean? It's not that dire. And so I think that helps. So I think, continue to build the trenches, and then looking at that tight end spot and then the safety spot, like those are the big ones for me that like, just like, man, like you're going to need some help there. You don't have to do it all here in 2025, but the more swings you take, the better. So doing that in 2025 and doing that in 2026 is going to be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And again, tight ends, another one of those. They're pretty deep. They're pretty rich, right? Like you can still
the class,
go on day 2 with your second or third round pick and come away with a really good one, I feel like. And so again, and I know you agree with that, and we've talked about some of those prospects, but you know, again, for the Saints, I know that activity will be there. I don't think it's going to be fiery signings. They may have like one good splash here and then have some, you know, lower key stuff, some things that may not set the world on fire, some upside there. I think there's a lot of ways that they can go to help improve the team, but I don't think they're going to go gangbusters and spend all this crazy money or anything like that, even if they do believe they're going to compete in 2025.
Yeah, I think you're right, John. Like, and I think that was kind of our expectation from the very beginning, was that like when they said they were going to be more active, that it didn't mean that they were going to be involved in market setting. You know what I mean? Like, think back to like the biggest free agent acquisitions for the New Orleans Saints. Derek Carr is the biggest, right? 150 million total. It was like the biggest in terms of a free agent acquisition, not a re-signing or an extension or something like that. There's big extensions of that, but like him and Drew are probably at the top. Well, oh no, that wouldn't count because Chase Young was an extension. And so him and Drew are kind of at the top. And then probably like, what was Jarris? 54 million?
9 or 654, I think is what it was. 6 years, 54 million.
My goodness, 6 years. Jeez. And then after that, you're looking at like when they re-signed Malcolm Jenkins and when they signed like Larry Warford, $30 million total deal, 36, 34, whatever $1 million total deals. The Saints were never, even at their highest ability to spend and their we're one piece away era, did they ever get involved in the negotiating period. That's just never been an expectation for them. And so being more active always felt like, once free agency opens, they might do something in the second and third tiers, when last year they were kind of fourth tiering it for the most part, or last tiering it. Shout out LSU women's basketball. And until they signed Chase Young, right? Who was like a tier 1 guy, but signed at a later time because of medicals and all those other things. Sure. Like I think this was always kind of the expectation, and that active didn't mean overspent, you know?
Yeah. And again, we forget too that Ryan Ramczyk's probably going to be one of those post June 1st, you know, that are carrying that money on the books. They'll have to figure that out. I mean, I know they dropped his base salary and stuff, but that'll be something to pay attention. And again, even if they don't sign people right now, free agency is ongoing. They'll add people before they get to training camp. They always have that influx, like add right before like mandatory mini camp, and then they'll do some tryouts, and then they'll bring some people into training camp easily. But you know, it's really interesting times. I think you can look at the list of what they need and specific players. You could argue and say which ones you'd rather or prefer or anything like that. I think Leonard Floyd is obviously a big one, right? But you know, a corner.
Is he available?
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't checked. Pull that tape back for about 20 minutes ago. But,
I will say on the. Oh, go ahead. No, yours is more important.
No. I was just rambling. You were going to talk about Leonard Floyd.
I was going to say about Ryan Ramczyk real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to ramble on Ramczyk, but I won't ramble. I would say that like for the Ryan Ramczyk thing, by the way, I would expect that is just something that they just simply don't process until after June 1st. Sure. Like don't be surprised if you don't hear about Ryan Ramczyk, assuming that he does retire but like, which is what everyone is assuming and is likely to happen. But like, if that's going to happen, don't be surprised to not see that designated as a post June 1 transaction. Cause I don't even think you could do that. That's literally a like, oh yeah, he's going to retire and we'll just process it on June 2nd. It's typically the way that that's done and everything like that. So the Saints would also have 2 other post June 1 transactions, but I don't know if they plan on using any. Like the guys that would have made sense to do that with, or
Carr would have been one.
Yeah, Carr would have been one of them, and then maybe one of the defensive tackles just to save a little bit of extra money or something like that. But like all those guys have been restructured, so I don't even know if they intend to do that this year or use those.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, they're making it work without it, and so again, we'll kind of see as we kind of wrap and wind down here. Any other information you got or insight from some of the coaches you talked to that you want to share on our time together? I was really excited to talk to Terry Joseph. I really think he's like going to be
Terry was
pretty
awesome.
Good.
He's
Terry's
awesome.
really likable.
Really likable. I kind of spoke with him and TJ Paganelli quite a bit because I thought that it was interesting. Like those are just roles that we haven't seen in New Orleans a ton. Defensive pass game coordinator and then a run game coordinator on the offensive side. So like, how do they work? What do they work in concert with? And both of them sort of describe themselves as an extension of their play caller, basically. And so TJ being more of an extension of the run game and working, Kellen Moore's run game, but also working in concert with Brendan Nugent. And then you look at Terry Joseph as an extension of Brandon Staley, to where Brandon Staley is effectively like, okay, so how do we limit this pass game? So I think the reason why I like that is because, and I was just about to answer a question that just popped up in the chat, if there are any worries about too many cooks, like perfectly timed. I don't think so, because it's not a bunch of people trying to create a scheme. It's people that are in charge of different areas of someone's scheme. And so your translation becomes extremely specific because of that. It's kind of like if I'm the CEO of a major corporation, you don't want me in charge of dealing with all of my employees that are in Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Texas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, all this stuff. I have regional directors and regional managers and site managers and floor managers and, shift managers and all that are all a part of that thing, right? There's the whole middle management piece of it. There's a whole lower management piece of it, so on and so forth. And so I think that that is where the value is in this, to where the communication just becomes a little bit more finite, a little bit more has to be clear, because you got to worry a little bit about translation stuff, I imagine. But we're not talking 20 people before it gets to a player. We're talking about 1 or 2 people before it gets to a player. So I don't think I'm too worried about it. So it is more delegation than it is, too many people wearing the pleated hats. And so I mentioned that as a means of saying that some of these roles are going to be new and unique for fans. And so I wanted to get some clarity on both of them, but that's kind of the way that they described all that. The last thing was just this sort of identification of what will dictate the game plan, and that everything will effectively change week to week outside of things that are specific to the DNA of the team. And John, we saw last year, or really we've seen less of that more and more since Sean Payton left. Because that's kind of what Sean was. Sean was all about mismatches and, matchup, schematics and stuff like that. And we saw that less and less over Dennis Allen's tenure, to where things became more and more structured, more and more finite, more and more strict. You play this role. We do this thing. We focus on what it is that we do. We're not worried about what they do. If we execute, we'll win. That's not always the case. Because if you're doing the same thing over and over again and they're adjusting to you, you're stuck. So you got to be able to evolve and adapt as well. And so I like that we heard that from both Kellen Moore and from Brandon Staley over on both sides of the football.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm excited to, again, see it. And when and they're still months away from actually ever taking the field, right? That's the thing, is you'll get the rookie mini camp after the draft, and you'll have the OTAs, which are voluntary. And then, June is the first time you'll see everybody together, right? And stuff. And it's just going to be a progress, but it's and talking to the coaches, how excited they are, and just kind of the building blocks. It's kind of just where you're starting a day, this day, and by the way, they're still doing all the draft prep stuff too. Like they're doing everything, still player evaluations, all this stuff that's going on while still trying to add new things. I thought it was pretty interesting to get a little peek behind the scenes of what these coaches actually do, for lack of a better phrase too.
Yeah. It's like we're dreaming of every possibility right now, and then we'll see what happens when everybody gets on the field. Like, that's dope. That's fun. I think if I'm any NFL team, not just the New Orleans Saints, if I'm any NFL team, I'm fine if what I've been doing hasn't been working. I'm fine failing again because I tried something different. What I'm not okay with, if I'm any NFL team, is if I have not been finding success at the level that I want to find success, I'm not okay with failing because I didn't change, because I didn't adapt, and because I didn't evolve. You know what I mean?
Say it louder for the people in the back.
That's the thing for me. And I know people are like, well, but wait, the roster hasn't changed. I know, but literally everything else will. And again, I think you're watching for change via addition more than change via replacement, to go full circle back to Jono's question earlier on in the show. Like, I think you're looking at this team to change, but you're looking at them to change roster-wise, but you're looking at that roster to change because there's new faces, not necessarily replacement right at this point. But replacement is probably going to come inherently over the course of the next year or two.
Yeah, and I will say, too, as we, again, wrap up and stuff, is they have to hit this draft. Like, they have got to not just pick the players have to be developed, the players have to go out and execute. Like, this is, I just, the casual, this is the most important draft ever. Like, legitimately, think about that. Like, it is because Kellen Moore, the direction of the franchise, it's a chance with new coaches, all this other stuff. If they can't start backfilling some of these positions, they can't start getting better prospects or all this other stuff, then this is going to be the same conversation we have next year. It's just going to be different players, different this, different that. I'd love to see them hit, not necessarily like 2017. That would be a dream come true, but get those type of players, develop them, have them play definitive roles, bigger roles, and then they're eventually your starters, whatever the case may be. But that's an area where New Orleans has just not been good for years now.
What is your definition of hitting on, let's say, a 9-player draft? Like, what is a hit for you on a 9-player draft?
I'd say anything within the top 150. I want to hit on all 6 of those, right? Like, that's the biggest thing is
and that means all of them should be starters, or all of them?
I don't think all of them should be starters. I think you should come away with at least one starter, potentially. Like, they're not going to automatically earn it. I think I'm looking at one starter, and then the rest of them, at least 3 of them, 3 or 4 are guys that have starting upside, maybe not starting right away, but have that potential to start. And the other one, if it's your last 3rd round pick if it's the top 150, somebody who's your developmental guy. That's what I like that. Yeah, I think that's kind of my vision of what I would want to come away within the top 150. Now the other picks, whatever, the practice squad, whatever. I don't care.
Round picks, like, you don't need an expectation there and stuff like that. Like, if those guys pan out, that's awesome. You're not always going to get a Brock Purdy. You're not always going to get a Tom Brady, as we've seen. Like, that's not no need.
Paulson.
I'm with you on that. I might be a little bit more greedy. I might say that, like, for this draft class, like,
be greedy.
2 out of those top 7 picks feel like they should be starters. Maybe even 1 on each side of the ball or something like that. Especially with this class, which is like not superstar heavy, but it's like starter heavy, if that makes sense. Feels like that's something you should be able to do. Ideally, you do that at 9 and 40, but who knows? You can do that at 9 and 93 for all we know. We never know in the draft. And so we'll see the way that it goes. But I'm right there with you, except I might be a little bit more greedy and say 2 starters.
No, I'm with you. And it depends on where they go, because and without getting too much into the draft, because we're going to go, if they got a Jedi Barron from Texas, if they got him at 9, and then they got their tight end and number in 2nd round, that's going to be the starter. I'd feel pretty good about that personally.
Johnny Barron would make me, that would be one of those ones where I'd be like, yeah, all right, I'm ready. Like, I can't wait for this season. Like, to me, he's like a day 1, 10-year starter in the league.
I agree.
Like, he's so good. So good.
I think he's exactly what this defense could need and would need and should, like, get. Like I really love the Tyler Warren pick. Don't get me wrong.
I know.
The
It's so tempting.
I'm not as much on the edge picks now, but I'm telling you, Barron, Warren, like that cloud, and even if Genty falls, like that's another one. But Barron is probably the guy who I think is like, if you can get him at 9, if you can pull the trigger, it's exactly what's going to change this defense in a lot of ways. Not by himself, but I think it changes a lot of what you can do.
Yeah.
Just me.
I'm just gonna agree. I'm not gonna. Yeah. I'm just gonna agree. I'm not gonna agree. I think we've said 6 times already. Like, all right, as we wrap up, cool. We keep jumping into other topic. So I'm gonna shut up. But I completely agree.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm giving away all our future shows, right? Like that's what we did last.
That's okay. You know what to come back for.
Shows. Yeah, we did the mock draft simulators. We did our compare mock picks. Like all that stuff is coming back. But without getting too much into the weeds right now, we want to see how free agency goes. All right, Ross, what you got coming up? I imagine a lot on LouisianaSports.net and Locked On Saints.
Well, now I'm just going to go write about Johnny Barron for the rest of the day. I have a wish list that's coming out that I'm probably going to need to update now that Leonard Floyd's available. So that's going to be out over on LouisianaSports.net coming up. In tomorrow's episode for Locked On Saints is going to be, I'm going to do a film study with my insiders group around a bunch of Chase Young's stand-up pass rush snaps from last year. Just kind of get a little bit of a look in terms of like what his production looked like and stuff like that. So I'm all about that for next week or for the next episode of that. And then of course anything going on around free agency. And then did I mention Johnny Barron? I'll probably write about him too. What you got coming up over at Athlon?
I keep laughing because all I can think of is like, man, what a great opportunity to use the Wolverine Photoshop meme, like the meme where he's looking at the photo.
Yes.
That's you with Leonard Floyd right now. Like that's
right.
To do that and tag you is like, yeah, look, it's Ross, y'all, and stuff. And on Athlon, look, it's it's all the draft cover, free agency. We did look at mock draft Monday though, back up, so you can go check that out, athlonsports.com, and then all of our Saints coverage over there. But we've got a free agency tracker up, all the player movement, everybody's got a tracker, right? But try to make it as detailed as possible. That way you can follow everything and such. Looking at a lot of things, talking about Chase Young, the impact there. Looked at Derek Carr's stuff recently, the direction of this team, kind of where the things go, and in free agency, where can they shop? Where can they play and get away with some good stuff without having to break the bank? Where do they find that sweet spot? That's kind of where we're looking at and operating right now. And so I think those are the biggest things. And of course, it's a interesting one. I didn't go to bed. I had to force myself to stay up till about 11 o'clock last night. And I was right up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I did get a little bit of sleep. Not as little as some people, not as much as many people, but this week is the one where you're just like glued to the computer, glued to the TV, just like waiting to seeing if people are going to respond, all this other stuff. But that's just this week in a nutshell.
Yeah. It's a grind, but it's so fun, man. I love it.
This is the fun part. We can wait for this time, and then it comes and goes, and it's like, now we got the draft, and then the draft comes and goes, like, well, then we got the schedule release, and then it comes and goes, and then we got rookie mini camps and all this. Like, it's just, it's going to get fun, and then when we get past mandatory mini camp, then it just goes for a while until camp. So. Any rate, all right. Well, guys, really appreciate everybody tuning in today. I know it was kind of like last minute in a way. Like we wanted to go live, but we just didn't say, hey, we're going live at this time. But on a Tuesday afternoon, a lot of you guys are tuned in. So thank you so much for giving us the time of the day. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Check out Ross's analysis on Locked On Saints as well. It's put up some stuff on Chase Young. Davon Godchaux. I always want to call him Davon, like for whatever.
What's been a struggle for me? I grew up with somebody whose last name was Godchaux.
Godchaux, yeah.
But it was spelled either the exact same or very similarly. So I always have trouble. I have so many takes in my trash bin on Adobe Premiere of me accidentally saying Davon Godchaux. that's like that Cajun. And so that's what I keep getting stuck with.
And it's funny, just not that I'm doing it. Tobiah Hewley, you talked to him yesterday, right? Okay,
Yep.
I had joked with him. One of the first things I said, it is Tobiah, right? Because you got that J in there, and I'm like thinking Key and Peele. I legit said Key and Peele. I can't assume anything. He just like just got destroyed.
He's
laughing.
so funny.
It's hilarious. He's a good dude too. Yeah. So
I thought it was Tobiah, but then
Tobiah. Okay.
Yeah. So it was like Tobiah, and then I had gone back to like some of his like college tape to like hear his name and some of that. And I was like, oh, okay, I made it way stronger than it needed to be.
Only place you'll get this kind of stuff is here. So we have fun. We love it. But guys, that's gonna do it for us today. I'm gonna get out so we can
For real
actually
this time.
get out of here and stuff. For real. This time we're definitely getting out of here. Y'all have a good one. Thanks. Stay good, people. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Plenty more coming where this came from.
Love you.
Tired of trying diet after diet without results? Mochi Health offers a long-term weight loss solution personalized to your needs. Our board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians provide expert guidance to help you succeed. Eligible patients can access custom-formulated GLP-1 medication at an affordable set price delivered monthly. Take our free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 for $40 off your first month. That's joinmochi.com.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability. ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.